Hey everybody, this is Jim at SP500chart.com. It's a little bit after 4:30 on May 29th, 2013. We're going to take a look at the chart of the S&P. And before we do, I need to remind you that the website and the video are for educational purposes only, and nothing stated at the site or in the video is intended to be used as investment advice. I can draw lines on charts, but you have to draw your own conclusions from your own research and make investment decisions that are suitable for your personal financial situation. I'm not a licensed financial professional. I'm just a guy that draws lines on charts. I mentioned yesterday, and just kind of, I felt like yesterday's video I was kind of whining a lot. You can't, I just can't tell. It's hard to get anything out of this. Well, it is. And I think there's nothing wrong with being honest and saying, this frankly could go either way. And that's as much a part of analysis as expect an 80-point drop, expect an 80-point rise. There are times when you just have to hold your hands up, kind of wave the white flag and say, I'm not sure. And I would rather be honest about that than, I've said many times, than to try to come across as if I know something you don't. I would be doing you a disservice if I pretended to know something, or if I tried to convince myself that I knew something that I didn't know. But here's what's going on right now. It looks to me like the past 5 days may be forming a little triangle pattern, an almost symmetrical triangle, not quite. The top side slopes down just a little bit more than the bottom line slopes up. Now, the height of this pattern is roughly 40 points, which is about 2.5% well, maybe a little less than 2.5% as a target, whichever way this thing breaks. So that may very well be a tradable pattern. It's a small one, but I said we're looking for some kind of pattern to show up on the chart. And really, I'd like to see something really huge, big, and impressive. Well, if this line breaks, then expect a 300-point drop. Or if this line breaks, expect a 300-point rise. We're not going to get that, okay? Not for a while. Matter of fact, we're not going to get a 300-point projection. We may end up with 100, 120, something like that at some point. But here's the triangle, and you see that there is a convergence of the top and bottom lines. They meet very early on June 5th. So that means by very early next week, we should be looking at a market that is either going to go up to about 1,700, and it could do that on a back test, and on another back test of this line. Or we're looking for a drop to about 1,600. What's kind of interesting, actually the height of the line is more like 45 points. But what's interesting is that both of these possibilities take us, let's say we break down in 3 days. Both of those possibilities take us almost exactly to technically significant lines in our chart. The first would be a move to 1,700, which brings us for another back test of this lower green support line that used to be support, now broken, so now should serve as resistance. And if it breaks down to the bottom side, then it should take us down to about 1,600, where I would expect a decent bounce, primarily due to what I would expect of being some gap support. Now, let's real quickly talk what is gap support. We've talked about it before, but for new subscribers who haven't heard it framed this way, gap support is when the market leaves somebody behind with a gap. And because they're left behind, they don't feel like chasing. But if they're patient, they say, you know, I was not in the market on May 3rd when the S&P gapped up 18 points above 1600. If we come back to 1600 somewhere down the road, I'll be a buyer there, because I was surprised by the strength of that move, and if it comes back down to 1600, I want in. So if this triangle breaks to the downside, then it projects a move to 1600, which would likely be a spot where there is a decent sized bounce. If it breaks to the upside and goes up to 1700, well, you can see there's clearly room there for us to do that without messing up any of our expected attributes of this line. Now, if we take a little bit closer look at this triangle, just a little something that's interesting. There's some little patterns that are inside these patterns. For one thing, if we take this top and this top, you can see once we got over this line right here, we moved up. If we make a parallel line here, it doesn't quite work out to be parallel, but very close. Take this peak, and then later in the day, the S&P got over this little line. It's a minor line, very minor. But you can see once it eked over it, it back tested it a couple times and kind of said, hey, you know, I kind of like being up here on top of this line. So maybe this is kind of setting up another move to this upper line tomorrow sometime. The other thing that's interesting is our blue line that we had drawn underneath the lows in early May. If we extend that straight on out, I made mention that it didn't look like that that trend line was really of much value, and it's probably not really, but it is interesting to see these little jukes and jives and how a couple times it gets approached and it seems to at least be exerting some influence for whatever reason. And I cannot for the life of me explain to you why this would be the case after we spent 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 days just totally, completely away from this trend line. And then we come down and all of a sudden it starts to act as if it's a little barrier, if you will, that the market can pretty easily overcome, but it still is having a small role to play. So right now, in addition to still looking at our at some of our channels, this rising yellow line, and again, as we've mentioned, this green channel that's now broken, so we would expect this bottom line to continue to serve as resistance. But as I mentioned before, when you have a break of a channel, it is for one of two reasons. It's either setting up a reversal or it's setting up a continuation. And we don't know which it is right now. But we do at least have a fairly a pretty good looking little pattern here that I would follow going into this week. And, in the rest of the week, Thursday and Friday, and see if we get the expected action out of this small but fairly well formed symmetrical triangle. So guys, that's your video for May 29th, 2013. Thank you for your time and attention. Thank you for your support. And let's see what the markets bring us tomorrow and Friday.